Hey everybody, welcome to the real United States, and welcome to Salem, Massachusetts. We're here in front of this statue in the center of town of Roger Conant. Now, Roger Conant was the first settler here in Salem, Massachusetts in 1626. Part of the Dorchester organization, their group, expedition if you will, that came here from Dorchester, England in the early 1600s. And Roger is attributed with being the person who founded the town of Salem. Now, as we had mentioned in a previous episode, some of the settlers from Salem in that period of time came down from Gloucester because the Gloucester community failed for a year and then kicked back up. So here we are in downtown Salem, very famous historic site and home of the Salem witch trials. We're going to take you around, we're going to show you a little bit about the town and try to tell you a little bit about its history and the witch trials. Now, as we set off here in Salem, I wanted to show you a little bit of this town center, the beautiful brick architecture behind me. It's a very vibrant modern city today, and nothing like you picture it from the 1600s and the days of the witch trials. Today it is in fact a very nice modern city. Now, you're going to see here behind me now this beautiful big park, and it's probably, I don't know, 5 or 7 acres right in the center of town. It's like a town square. There's young folks over there playing soccer. Really gorgeous park, big iron fence around it. So it's really a very pretty town to visit. Even though there's a lot of history here and certainly some of it kind of dark, it's really a beautiful place. So, and there is, at least it has the distinction advantage of having some parking, which is a premium in almost any city here in the northeastern United States. So in 1692, a series of events began in February that led to what is now the famous Salem witch trials. Now, the Salem witch trials extended from February of 1692 to about May of 1693. And it was the most historically known case of mass hysteria probably in the world, where a series of 20 people were accused of witchcraft. Actually more than 20, there was about 25, 20 of which were ultimately executed for practicing witchcraft, which they weren't, and proclaimed their innocence to the day that they died. 19 of the 20 were hanged right here in Salem. 5 died in prison, 2 of which were infant children. So what had happened was, in that era, in the late 1600s, witchcraft and superstition still was a very real, integral part of society. People either were plagued with illness or with loss of crops or loss of property, and they blamed someone. They needed someone to blame, and so they accused someone of witchcraft. At that time, a gentleman by the name of Jonathan Corwin was tasked with investigating these accusations. Well, he and John Hawthorne proceeded to investigate those. Well, Jonathan Corwin lived in this house right behind me, this big black house, which today is called the Witch House, and it is the only remaining structure with direct ties to the Salem witch trials of the 1690s. Now, Corwin was a wealthy individual when he moved here and bought the house in 1675. Yada yada, him and his wife lived here. But Corwin investigated, along with Hawthorne, these accusations and ultimately sat on the court of Oyer and Terminen, I believe it is, who put these 20 people to the gallows. So this now is owned by the Park Service and is operated as a museum. You can go in, you can tour it. And this structure, again, dates from before the 1690s, before 1675 when Corwin bought it. It was a small house, he added on to it. I think it's probably painted black more for aesthetics because it's the witch house. I'd like to point out look at the steepness of the roof. Again, we're in northern Massachusetts, not terribly far from the Maine border. A lot of snow here. Roofs often in that era certainly pitched very steep to keep the snow loads as low as possible, so the roofs didn't collapse. And that's one of the reasons that this house has survived over 300 years to this day. But it's nice to know there is still one piece of this historic event still in existence here in Salem. So mass hysteria, for those of you who are curious, you can look this up, but essentially it's when there is a travesty, like say illness, might be disease, might be loss of crops, something like that, and you need someone to blame. Well, that fear is spread literally through mimetic epidemiology. So the memes that we, as we call them today, are the sort of things that spread this psychosis from one person to another. Even though that the individual who contracts this is not necessarily psychotic, they get caught up in the fury of the events of the day. So if you think that this is something that happened back in the day, it could never happen today, I want you to think about some of the events today where people get caught up in the hysteria of the moment without sitting down and logically thinking about all of the circumstances and other possible explanations. Mass hysteria is still a very real medical condition that can happen today. Now, the events of the 1692-93 witch trials have become very much a part of the culture and even the language here in the United States. To this day, a witch trial is usually the hunt for a scapegoat, somebody that we can blame for the events that have gone awry in our lives. So you'll find those sometimes inside of companies where something went wrong and there's a witch hunt to find someone to blame so that everyone else could feel like, well, okay, it wasn't my fault. So that's permeated our language. Now, the Salem witch trials also have been a big part of literature and cinema throughout the years, and it's been made into a movie several times, but probably the most famous in American history was the 1953 play, The Crucible, written by Arthur Miller. Very intense. If you get a chance to read it, I'd recommend it. I've read it several times in the course of my life, but it is a very heavy work. It's very intense about these things that were going on socially between people, the interactions, the mental set of the day. And I think that Miller did an excellent job in trying to bring that to life in the reader's mind. So much so did the idea of Salem and the witch trials and witchcraft permeate the American culture that in the early mid-1960s, a television show was produced called Bewitched, featuring the ever so beautiful Elizabeth Montgomery as a ancient witch living in modern suburbia and married to a mortal husband. It was a very cute comedy, ran several seasons. You got to be my age or a little even older to really remember it. But again, it was part of how witchcraft, stemming from Salem, permeated the entire culture of America. And now those iconic symbols from American television have found their way back in the form of a bronze statue here right in the middle of Salem, Massachusetts. Another one of the interesting connections to Salem's historic witch trials, tangentially, is this structure behind me. This is literally the House of Seven Gables. Now, it is the actual house that Nathaniel Hawthorne used as the basis and the name for his famous 1851 novel of the same name, The House of Seven Gables. Now, the house at the time actually belonged to his cousin, Susanna Ingersoll. And the story is a lot about intrigue and betrayal and retribution and atonement. And there's certain elements in the story about the supernatural, of course, because we're still talking, you know, the 1850s. When he wrote this, the early 1850s, probably started in the 1840s. So much after the 1690s, but still in an era where superstition was alive and well in the United States. Now, to boot, Nathaniel Hawthorne was a descendant, I don't know if he was a grandson or great-grandson or something like that, of John Hawthorne, one of the judges at the original Salem witch trials, and John Hawthorne being the only one who never recanted his actions in those trials. So he was directly associated with the Salem witch trials of the 1690s, a descendant of one of the judges, and a lifelong resident. He was born here in Salem, Massachusetts. So there's going to be a lot of elements about that in his story about the House of Seven Gables. It's a beautiful setting here. It's now a museum. It's right on the edge of the bay here in Salem. And you can go in and tour, and I believe we're going to try and go do that now. I don't think we're able to take any footage from inside. Usually museums are kind of funny about that. But I did want to stop here and show you the House of Seven Gables that inspired the novel. So from the 1690s and the Salem witch trials up through the 1850s and the writing of the House of Seven Gables, and all through the history of the United States for 300 years, Salem has proved to be a very important part of the American culture, American history, and the development of our language, the development of our culture, and certainly in its day, an important part of the development of our industry. So I hope you've enjoyed this somewhat brief tour of Salem, Massachusetts. Maybe it has sparked some ideas for further research. I certainly hope it has. It's been a beautiful place to visit. If you've got questions or comments, I encourage you to leave them in the comment section below. I love hearing from everybody. I try to get back to everyone that I can. If you haven't already, please pick subscribe. Come along for the adventure. We love having everybody with us. And as always, thank you for watching.